On my wedding day, I stood at the altar in a dress borrowed from a neighbor. The guests laughed. My own mother-in-law called me trash. And just when I thought my heart couldn't break any further, a stranger walked in and stopped the entire wedding. What happened next changed everything. Before I go any further, if you have ever been looked down on, laughed at, or made to feel like you were not enough, I need you to stay with me until the very end of this story, because what I am about to tell you is something I kept locked inside for years. And I promise you, by the time I finish, you will understand why I believe that life has a way of settling every score in ways we could never plan and never see coming. So please, don't go anywhere. This is my story, and it is the most important one I will ever tell. I grew up in a town so small that everyone knew your name, your business, and most importantly, your bank balance. And ours was always empty. My father was a day laborer. He woke up before the sun every single morning, and he came home after it set with cracked hands and a quiet dignity that I did not fully understand when I was a child. My mother washed and ironed clothes for the families who lived on the better side of town. She never complained, not once, but I saw it. The way those women handed her the payment without looking at her, the way they spoke to her like she was invisible. I saw it, and I stored it somewhere deep inside me, in a place I did not yet have words for. We were not rich in money, but my father had something that no amount of money could buy. He was the kind of man who would give his last meal to a stranger, the kind of man who stopped on a rainy road to help someone he had never met. He believed in his bones that how you treat people when you have nothing says everything about who you are. He told me that more times than I can count. I just did not know how much the world was watching him live that truth. I grew up fast. I learned to stretch a small bag of rice across a whole week. I learned to smile when people pitied us and to walk with my chin up when they mocked us. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with the idea that one day my life would be different. Not because I wanted to be rich, but because I wanted to stop being invisible. I wanted to walk into a room and have someone look at me like I mattered. That want, that quiet, burning want, is what made me fall so easily for Rohan. I met him at a local market on an ordinary Tuesday. He was laughing at something his friend said, and when he turned and caught me looking, he did not look away. He smiled. A real smile, or so I thought. We talked for almost an hour between the vegetable stalls and the smell of rain on dry earth. He seemed warm, gentle. He asked about my family and actually listened to the answers. He called me the next day, and the day after that. For 6 months, he made me feel like the most important person in any room we shared. His family was a different story. They were middle-class people who wanted everyone to believe they were upper class. His mother, Sunita, wore gold jewelry on weekdays and spoke loudly in restaurants so people would notice her. When Rohan told her about me, she went cold. She asked about my father's job, my family's property, what my mother's side owned. When he told her the truth, she told him I was not suitable. But Rohan pushed. He insisted. He wore her down over months of arguments, and eventually she agreed. I thought that meant she accepted me. I was wrong. She had simply agreed to a plan I did not yet know existed. The morning of my wedding, I woke up alone. My mother had passed the year before, a quiet illness that took her faster than any of us were ready for. My father sat in the corner of our small home that morning, dressed in his best shirt, which was old but pressed perfectly. He looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He held my face in his big, rough hands and said, "You are always worth more than this world knew." I didn't understand what he meant. I just hugged him and told him not to make me cry before I even got there. I wore a dress borrowed from my neighbor, Mrs. Pillai. She was a kind woman who had worn it to her own daughter's graduation years before. It was cream-colored and simple, and when I put it on, I thought it was lovely. I had dried flowers in my hair because fresh ones were too expensive, and I had done my own makeup with a small kit my aunt had gifted me for my birthday. I felt beautiful. That is the part that still breaks my heart a little when I think about it. I genuinely felt beautiful that morning. We arrived at the wedding hall, which Rohan's family had chosen. It was modest but decorated. There were maybe 80 guests, mostly from his side. My side was smaller. My father, 2 aunts, and a handful of friends. The moment I walked in, I felt the shift. Eyes moved to my dress. I saw a woman lean to another and whisper, her hand covering her mouth. I lifted my chin and kept walking. Then Sunita appeared. She walked toward me with a smile that did not reach her eyes, looked me up and down slowly, deliberately, and said, loud enough for the people around us to hear, "Is this really what my son chose? She looks like she came to serve, not to marry." A few people laughed, real out-loud laughter. My 2 aunts went still. My father, standing a few feet away, heard every word. I watched something move across his face, not anger, but a deep, quiet pain. That hurt me more than anything Sunita said. Rohan was standing nearby. I looked at him. He looked at the floor. The ceremony began anyway. I stood at the altar and told myself to breathe. I told myself that once this part was over, things would settle. People would see who I was over time. I would win them over. I believed in patience. I believed in goodness. I believed that love was enough. Then his aunt, a large woman named Devika, stood up from the 3rd row. She stood up in the middle of the ceremony, not at the end, not during a pause, right in the middle of the priest speaking, and she raised her voice and said, "I just want everyone to see what the bride's family contributed." She walked to the small table where my dried flower bouquet rested, and she held it up. She held it up like it was evidence of something shameful. "Not even real flowers," she said. And the room erupted. I stood there at the altar in Mrs. Pillai's cream dress with dried flowers in my hair, and I listened to 80 people laugh at me. Some looked uncomfortable. Most did not. I felt my hands go cold. I felt the smile I had been holding drain from my face. I did not cry. I refused to give them my tears. But inside, I was shattering, slowly, like glass that cracks in silence before it finally falls apart. Rohan leaned close to me then. I thought he was going to defend me. I thought this was the moment he would become the man I believed he was. Instead, he whispered, "Maybe we should postpone. You're embarrassing me." Embarrassing me? Me, standing there, having done nothing wrong, having loved him fully, having shown up with everything I had, which was not much but was entirely mine. I was embarrassing him? The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the altar table. I did not know what I was going to do next. I did not know if my legs would hold me. And then the doors at the back of the hall opened. He walked in. Slowly, calm, the way only people who never need to rush walk. He was dressed simply, dark clothes, no flash, no noise. He was maybe 40 with steady eyes that moved across the room once and seemed to take in everything at once. Nobody knew him. I could tell by the murmuring, the craned necks, the confusion. He walked straight down the center of the hall toward the altar, raised one hand, and said 4 words in a voice that filled the entire room without him raising it. "Stop. I know her." Silence. Complete, total silence. And then I saw his face clearly, and my heart stopped for an entirely different reason. His name was Vikram, and I had not seen him since we were both children. 20 years ago, my father had been walking along the swollen bank of the river near our town after 3 days of heavy rain. He heard something, A boy, maybe 10 years old, had slipped from the bank and was being pulled by the current. My father did not hesitate. He was not a strong swimmer. He went anyway. He pulled that boy out, carried him to the road, stayed with him until people came. When the boy's father arrived, a man from the city, well-dressed and trembling, he grabbed my father's hands and wept. He kept asking what he could give him, what he could do. My father said nothing. He said, "I have a daughter at home. Just go be with your son." He never asked for a thing. He never told anyone that story. I only knew it because I had heard him tell my mother once, quietly, thinking I was asleep. That boy was Vikram. And his father had spent years building a business empire, land development, agriculture, rural infrastructure across 3 countries. And when he passed, he left it all to Vikram, along with one instruction: find the laborer who saved your life and make sure his family never suffers. Vikram had been looking for us for 3 years. He found us 1 week before my wedding. He stood at the front of that hall and he told the whole story, every detail. His voice never wavered, never rose. He just spoke cleanly and plainly, and the room that had been laughing 60 seconds ago was now so quiet you could hear the ceiling fans turning. He told them about my father's hands, about the rain, about the current, about a man who had nothing and gave everything he had without a second thought. Then he turned to Sunita. He looked at her the way you look at something you have already decided is beneath your consideration, and he said, "The woman you just humiliated in front of your guests comes from more class and more character than everyone in this room put together." He turned to Rohan. "A man who watches the woman he is supposed to love be mocked and says nothing is telling you exactly who he is. Listen to him." Rohan's family began to protest. His uncle stood up and demanded to know who this man was, where he came from, what right he had to walk into a private ceremony. Vikram reached into his jacket pocket and placed a single business card on the edge of the altar table. He did not say anything else. He just waited. One of the guests near the front picked it up. I watched the color leave his face. He showed it to the man beside him. That man whispered the name. A woman across the aisle recognized it from somewhere, a newspaper, a television interview, and her hand went to her mouth. Sunita looked at the card, then she looked at me, and for the first time that entire morning, she had nothing to say. I want to be clear about something. Vikram did not save me. What he did was hold up a mirror so that everyone in that room, including me, could see the truth plainly. But what I did next, I did myself. I reached up and unpinned the veil from my hair, slowly, deliberately. I set it down on the altar table. The hall was still completely silent. I could feel 80 pairs of eyes on me, but for the first time that morning, I did not feel small. I felt something settle inside me, like a decision that had been waiting to be made. I looked at Rohan and I said, "I came here today with nothing but love, and you showed me very clearly that was not enough for you. So now I know you were never enough for me." I turned and I walked down the center of that hall, past every laughing face that was no longer laughing, past the dried flowers that Devika had put back on the table, out through those doors that Vikram had walked in through minutes before. I walked out into the afternoon sun and I breathed. One breath, then another. My father came through the doors behind me and took my hand, and we stood there together, not speaking, just standing. Vikram came out a few minutes later. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer pity. He simply walked to where we stood and said, "I have a car. Let me take you somewhere better than here." We rode, mostly in silence. My father sat beside me and held my hand the entire way. Eventually, Vikram spoke. He explained everything, the foundation he had built in my father's name 3 years ago, a program that provided scholarships and vocational training for women from low-income backgrounds across 4 states. Hundreds of women had already passed through it. It was growing faster than his team could manage, and he had been building toward one thing: finding the right person to lead it, someone who understood, from the inside, what it meant to need a hand up, someone with no ego about the work, someone who would pour themselves into it without needing recognition. He looked at me and said, "I cannot think of a single person more right for this than you." I sat there in that car in a borrowed dress, flowers still in my hair, on what was supposed to be my wedding day, and I laughed, a real full laugh that surprised even me. My father looked over at me, and then he started laughing too, and Vikram, quiet, composed Vikram, smiled for the first time since I had seen him walk through those doors. I took the role. I want to say I thought about it carefully, weighed my options, made a measured decision, but the truth is, I knew in that car. Something in me recognized it the way you recognize a door that was always meant for you. I moved to a new city, I lived in a small apartment, and I learned everything from the ground up: how the foundation operated, what the women in the program needed, where the gaps were, what was missing. I was not polished. I did not have fancy credentials or a big title behind my name. What I had was the memory of my mother's hands, calloused from washing other people's clothes, the memory of my father, pre-dawn, leaving in the dark. That memory kept me honest. It kept me useful. Within 6 months, we had expanded to 2 more states. Within a year, the program had been covered by 3 national publications. Women who had come in with nothing were opening small businesses, sending their children to school, standing up in community meetings and speaking. I watched it happen in real time, and I felt something I did not have a name for at first. Eventually, I recognized it. It was purpose, the real kind, the kind that does not ask for applause. As for Rohan, I heard things the way you hear things when a story travels. His family's reputation suffered. The guests who had been there that day talked, and the talk spread. And in a town where image was everything, that kind of damage does not heal quickly. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, he called me once. I looked at my phone. I watched his name on the screen until it stopped ringing. I did not call back. Not out of anger, I want to be very clear about that. I held no bitterness toward him. Bitterness is heavy, and I had decided I was only carrying things that moved me forward. I simply had nothing left to say. Vikram and I built a friendship over that first year that was unlike anything I had experienced before. It was built on shared purpose, on long conversations about what the foundation could become, on the quiet understanding of 2 people who had both seen the cost of being underestimated. Neither of us rushed anything. Neither of us needed to. Some things grow in their own time, and the best ones always do. I am telling you this story today from a place I could not have imagined on that morning when I stood in a borrowed dress and heard a room full of people laugh at me. Not because my circumstances became perfect, they did not. Life does not work that way. But because I learned something that morning that I will carry until my last day. Your lowest moment is not a verdict, it is a direction. The people who laughed at me that day were not villains in my story. They were simply not part of where I was going. The humiliation I felt at that altar turned out to be the most clarifying moment of my life. It showed me exactly who Rohan was before I spent years learning it the hard way. It showed me what I was made of when I walked out of those doors instead of staying somewhere I was not wanted. And it opened a door, the door that Vikram walked through, that I never would have found otherwise. My father told me once that how you treat people when you have nothing says everything about who you are. He lived that, quietly, completely, without expecting anything in return. And 20 years later, that single act, pulling a boy from a river on a rainy afternoon, reached forward through time and changed the entire shape of my life. Karma is not always fast, but it is always accurate. If you are in your low moment right now, if someone has looked at you the way that room looked at me, if you have been made to feel small or not enough or invisible, I need you to hear this. You are not at the end. You are at the turn. And sometimes the turn comes from the most unexpected direction at the most impossible moment, when a door opens at the back of the room and everything changes. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. It took me a long time to be ready to tell it, and knowing that you listened means more than I can say. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone else's, share it. Pass it on to someone who needs it today. And if you are new here, subscribe, because there are more stories like this one, stories of real pain and real turning points waiting to be told. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of this hit you the hardest. I read every single one. Until next time, keep walking forward. The door is always closer than you think.